Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with my third update for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. This is a project that I'm doing this year, basically to rotate through my eyeshadow collection and focus on my palettes this year. I kind of want to get a better feel of each palette as their own, like using them all by themselves, not mixing with other things, because that's what I tend to do when I project pan. I usually open up like 5 different palettes. I use the shade that I am panning and kind of neglect the rest of the palette, apart from obviously like Project Level Up, which is another reason why I created that project, was because I wanted to get like a better way to use my palettes overall and not use honing in on specific shades. But I wanted another way of doing that this year, so I created this project where I basically do like a 1 week 1 palette where I focus on each palette, and I have to do 3 exclusive looks with each palette per week, just again to get a feel of the palette as a whole. Afterwards I do go ahead and rate the palettes as well with different criteria. So I have 4 different criteria for a total of 20 points, and then that's a way for me to know where the palettes fall, and at the end of the year I'm going to do a declutter with everything that is ranked on the lower end. So that's kind of one part of the video. A second part of this video is inspired by Laura Force. She has created like an eyeshadow bank this year, and actually she started last year I believe. So I made that part of this project as well. So I have basically low buy, no buy on eyeshadow, and I have to earn points in order to buy eyeshadows. Right now I'm digging my way out of the negative, but I'm going to talk about that when I get to that section of the video. And then we have a third segment in this video as well, which is Expand Those Pans, which was created by Dora, and I will have both Laura and Dora linked down below if you want to check out their channels. But with Expand Those Pans, basically you just focusing on existing pans that you have in your collection, and you work on expanding those pans. And what I have done is that I have selected a eyeshadow from my different palettes. So from the focus palettes that I have, if they have pans in them, I'm focused on 1 pan in those palettes to use 5 times each in order to expand those pans. So that is my kind of take on that project. But make sure to check out Dora, like I said, as well as Laura down below. But without all that being said, I'm going to jump into the video. Before I do so though, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I think I'm gonna start with the palettes today. I did start with the low buy I think last update but I'm gonna do the palettes first. So I have had 4 palettes to focus on. I'm gonna start with the first one, which is my Colourpop The Child palette. So let me bring that out. So this was the palette that I worked on for the first week. I'm going to insert some footage here of the palette and the swatches so you can see what it looks like. But this is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. I really love this one. So I wanted to focus on this one because it has a lot of green shades, and I thought it would work well for March and also leading up to St. Patrick's Day. So that is the palette right there. Let me jump in to the first look. So we have the first look right here, which is more of a greeny kind of minty look. And I started off with Float Your Crib on the inner and outer corner, just to create like a halo effect. And then I took the shade Baby Face, and I ended up using that in my crease to blend that shade, as well as like in the blend, so all the way up to my kind of crease area, as well as the lower lash line. So I'll use Baby Face a lot. I took the shade Right Hand Mando and tapped that on the center of my lid, and then I ended up taking the shade Sipping Soup, which is another kind of slightly lighter green, and I put that between the kind of matte shade and that shimmer shade just to create a better blend. And then lastly for this look, I took the shade Precious Cargo and I put that in my inner corner, and I created that first kind of green halo look. So that is the first look from this palette. Really like that look. I love doing green looks. Honestly, I love using like these 6 shades together, create the most beautiful looks. So that was the first one. For the second look right here, I wanted to do a green look again, but I wanted to include some of the more neutral shades in this look too. So I started off with the shade Little Frog, and I used it all over my lid and crease, which is that kind of lighter green in the bottom corner. So I used that a lot. Then I ended up taking the shade Droid Protocol, which is the deep brown, and I used that to make a winged liner connected to the lower lash line. So I used it on my lower lash line and I built up into a liner on the top lid. Then I ended up using the shade The Force, and I topped that on top of the lid, kind of more like as a sparkly effect. I didn't build it up fully. I just wanted more of a kind of sheer layer of the shade. And then I used the shade Precious Cargo again in my inner corner, and that was the second look. For day 3, we have this look right here, and this is more of a neutral kind of look. So I used the shade Just Like a Tatooine, green in my crease as well as my lower lash line. I took the shade Droid Protocol again, that deep brown, and I used that in my outer corner. Again, I used the Force all over my lid, and then a Precious Cargo in the inner corner. And that's kind of my go-to look if I want to make more of a neutral look with this palette, and I really like how this one turned out. And those are the 3 looks that I made with this palette. So for the Expand Those Pans section, because as you can see I have a lot of pans in this palette, the pan that I wanted to focus on for Expand Those Pans, I actually forgot to roll this in last month, but I did randomize that in the video so you could see the footage. But I ended up rolling the shade The Force, which is this one right here, which is actually one of my favorite shades in the palette. Actually, that's not true. I do like that shade, but there's a lot of shades in here that I love, to be fair. Initially when I first got this palette, that was my favorite shade, but yeah, I think there's probably other things that are tied for top favorite shade now. I love Right Hand Mando, I love these 2 greens as well. So I'm actually not sure which one my favorite shade is, but anyway, I had that as a goal to use 5 times, and I'm happy to say that I did use that 5 times. I used it in 2 of the looks, and then I used it 3 other times throughout the month, so I have hit my goal on that Expand Those Pans. When it comes to overall usage in the palette, let me just go through that quickly. So we used the shade Precious Cargo 4 times. I used Right Hand Mando once, Just Like a Tatooine once, Sipping Soup once, Babyface once, The Force 5 times, like I said. Little Frog once, Float Your Crib once, and Droid Protocol twice. So that is the use for this palette. And before I wrap up this palette, let me go through the ranking for it as well. So my note says that for Color Story, I gave it a 5 out of 5. As I've always said, this is one of my favorite color stories. I just love the undertones of the greens, and they're super versatile, as well as the neutrals that are mixed in. I think they can mix and match really well, and I think this is such a well executed palette. So that is a 5 for Color Story. For versatility, I gave it a 4. I said even though it's only a 9-pan palette, it's super versatile. You can make a pure warm neutral look with the 3 right tone shades, which is what I did in the last look. Or you can also make more of a cool toned neutral look if you mix some of those kind of silver shades in, like the silvery sagey kind of shades, which is the shade Right Hand Mando, I believe, this top center shade. Or you can of course make some kind of green looks. You can make some green looks with neutrals, and also like the greens have a lot of different undertones. So I think it's a very versatile palette. Of course you can't make like a really like, you know, yellow look or something like that, but overall, considering it's only a 9-pan palette, I still wanted to give it quite a high rating for 4 because I think it's such a versatile palette. So for quality, I gave it a 3, and I was debating between 3 and 4, but I said that I feel like this is the only area where the palette lacks, and I said that I feel like it used to be a 4, it used to be pretty good quality, but with age it has kind of declined a little bit. The mattes perform really well, but they're not perfect, and the shimmers aren't quite as impactful as I would want. However, it is one of Colourpop's best quality palettes in my opinion. Then for personal ranking, if you couldn't guess, I gave this one a 5. I said this is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, and I love greens and the neutral tones that are in this palette. And I don't think I've ever made a look with this palette that I didn't like. There's not a shade in here that I would switch out, which basically makes it a perfect palette for me. So with those rankings, this palette comes in at 17 out of 20 points. And that is palette number 1. So for palette number 2 happened during St. Patrick's Day, and I of course had to go with this palette right here because it has a lot of greens. I'm going to roll the footage right here, and I thought the top 2 rows of this palette would be perfect for St. Patrick's Day. They are, yeah, the most perfect greens, and I want to pull this palette in, and also feel like it's the most perfect spring palette, so I was really excited to play around with this one. This is also a relatively new palette to me in my collection. I hadn't used it on my eyes yet, so I was really excited to play around with it. But that is the palette, and let me go through the looks. So for look number 1, I wanted to make a pink and green look together. I actually wore this one in my Pan Those Eyeshadows update, but this is the look right here. So I started off with the shade Goddess on my outer corner and lower lash line, which is this kind of deep pink, and then I used the shade Hella on the outer crease and lower lash line to blend the deeper pink out. I used the shade Underworld on my inner crease, which is this kind of yellowy green, and I ended up blending that out with the shade Rebirth. For the center of the lid, I ended the shade Golden Bridge, which is like a medium kind of grass green, and I ended up taking the shade Fluorescence, which is slightly lighter, on my inner lid. And then I used to squeeze in another shimmer shade. I took the shade Hellfire and put that on the center of my lower lash line, and it also helped bring in those like pinkier tones. And lastly, I took the shade double-sided on my inner corner, and that is look number 1. So for look number 2, this is the one that I made for St. Patrick's Day. I really love this look. It was very kind of green themed, but I took the shade Ouroboros, which is a deep green, and I put that on my outer corner. Then I took the shade Moss on my inner lid as well as my crease. So I blended out the other shade with the shade and as well as filled out the rest of my lid. Then I moved on to shimmers, and I took the shade Venom on my center lid, which is the really bright green in the palette. And again, I took the shade Fluorescence on my inner lid just to brighten everything up a little bit. And again, lastly, for my inner corner, I used the shade Double-Sided, and that is the second look. For day number 3, we have the kind of most neutral out of the 3 looks. I quite like how this one turned out, and I wanted to try to create a more neutral look with this palette because it is quite a bright palette. So I took the shade Soot, and you put that on my outer corner and lightly on my lower lash line, which is a really dark kind of purpley shade. If I remember correctly, I did also kind of put that on slightly into the crease, but I could be wrong with that. You probably be able to see that better in the look. But I took the shade Wolf in my crease to blend everything out, which is more of a warm tone shade, so I didn't know how that was going to go, but I needed something to blend out that deep shade, and I used the shade Wolf. Then all over my lid I put the shade River, which is this beautiful kind of duochrome. It's very dimensional, and I really love how this one turned out. I used the shade Complete as a liner, which is a shimmery black. And then lastly, double-sided again on my inner corner, and that is the third and final look with this palette. Then for the usage of this palette, I ended up using Rebirth once, Fresque twice, Underworld once. I used Decay once, not in the 3 looks. I used it actually separately. That's the only shade I didn't use in the 3 looks, but I did use that in a different look, so I have completed that shade as well. Then for the second row, I used Everything Here once. For the third row, I also used Everything once. I used Double-Sided 3 times, I used River once, Soot once, and Complete once. So a couple shades I used more than once, but overall I used most of the shades once, and I have actually completed no plans behind on this one too, which is really exciting. So let's go through the ranking of this palette too. So for color story I put 4, and I said this is a fun color story, but it's also very out there. It's truly such an Angelica palette, lots of vibrant and colorful shades. I love the greens and pinks together, especially since they all have a warm undertone. Then for versatility, I put a 3. I said you can get a good variety of colorful looks. Obviously, all of them are going to be in the pink, purple, or green realm. There are numerous combinations you can try out. There's also a few more neutral shades, but overall it lacks both neutral and cool toned undertones, and that's kind of why I gave it a 3 and nothing higher. For quality, I said it's a good performing palette. There's a few issues, but not many. A handful of the shades perform a bit worse than I would want, but it's only because I know what ovens I can do. Overall though, the quality is great, especially considering some of these colors are harder to formulate, so I gave it a 4. For personal ranking, I gave it a 3. I said it's a stunning palette and I really loved playing with it, and I'm so happy to have it in my collection. I debated giving it a 4, but the reason why I'm only giving it a 3 is because it's very much a spring, maybe summer palette. I would only ever reach it for this time of year, and only when I also want to be super out there, so that's why I gave it a 3. And that actually means that this palette only equals to 14 points, which I was surprised by. I thought I would rank it higher, but just the way I split the ranking, this is the way it ended. But I'm really happy with this palette, and just if I would give it like a personal ranking, I probably would have given it higher than 14, but again, I kind of split out the ranking that way, and it gives me a better overall like ranking and performance, I think. So that is the second palette. Let me move on to the third. And for the third palette, we had my Product Level Up palette, which is the at4 size palette with Raw Beauty Christie and Colourpop. I will insert the footage here what the palette looks like and the swatches so you can see it, but it's a beautiful like kind of jewel toned, mostly all matte palette. It has a couple shimmer shades, 2 shimmer shades, and then 1 sequin shade, but it's overall quite a matte heavy palette with a lot of deeper colorful shades. So that is the palette right there, and again I'm going to move into the first look. For the first look, I took the shade Puffball in my crease and lower lash line, which is like a camel kind of shade. Then I built up some depth with the shade Homegrown, which is just a deep brown shade in my outer corner. I took the shade Chanterelle and I used that to blend everything out, which is the yellow in the palette. And then I ended up moving on to West Coast, which is a really bright gold shade, and I put that all over my lid. And that's the shades I use from this palette. I do want to note that in this look I also used a cream colored eyeshadow to clean everything up, as well as an inner corner highlight, and I just used my highlighter for that. So that is look number 1. For look number 2, I really love how this one turned out. I think a lot of you guys loved it too. I wore it in my Product Apocalypse update, but I started off the look by using PWN in my outer corner, in my outer crease, and also on my outer lower lash line, so a lot used like in that kind of outer area. I then moved on to the shade Emerald City, which is more of a kind of straight green shade, and I put that on my middle lid and my middle crease. I then moved on to the yellow shade in the palette Chanterelle again, and I used that on my inner lid and my inner crease. And then for my lower lash line, I used the shade Fiddlehead, which is more of a kind of army green, and I used that on my lower lash line to blend. Then for my shimmer, I used the shade West Coast again, and I put that on my center lid as well as my center lower lash line. I used to give a little bit of sparkle, and that is all the shades I use from this palette. But again, I reached for my highlighter as my inner corner highlighter, and that is day 2, and I really love this look. Again, I think a lot of you guys did too. Then for day 3, I wanted to create more of a green look, and I started off by using the shade Emerald City on my outer corner. Then I took the shade Fiddlehead and I used that in my crease and my outer lower lash line, which is that kind of army green again. Then I took the shade Evergreen all over my lid and the center lower lash line, which is the green shimmer in the palette. And again, that's all the shades I used from this palette. It was more of a simple look, and I topped that off with my highlighter again on my inner corner, and that is day 3. So I'm not going to cover the usage in this palette because it is my Product Level Up palette. I'm also not going to show it, but that is the looks that I made with this palette. I feel like there's definitely more that I could have done. I could definitely made more like a plummy pinky tone look as well, and I could have done like a pure yellow look. I could have done like a really nice deep smoky eye and with kind of like a blue black smoky eye. Like there's so many options with this palette because there's like a lot of different shades, but I only created 3 looks, so I had to limit what I did, and I'm really happy with the 3 looks that I created. So for the ranking of this palette, for color story, I gave it a 4. I said this is such a fun color story, it gives a lot of depth but still staying colorful, and you can create so many different looks with this palette. I said I do wish there was more alternatives for shimmers though, because it only has those 2, which aren't my favorite. For versatility, I gave it a 4. I said you can create a lot of different looks: neutral, colorful, warm, cool. However, the shimmers are quite limiting because there's only 2 of them, and overall a lot of the looks end up quite deep and rich, so that's why I gave it a 4. For quality, I said it's a 3. It's one of the better Colourpop palettes when it comes to quality, however it's still not the best overall. The mattes work well for the most part, but I had a few issues with patchiness. The green shimmer also really isn't very impactful, so I only gave it a 3 for that category. And then for personal rating, I gave it a 3. I said I like this palette, but it falls somewhere in the middle for me, and it's not a favorite, but I did enjoy the looks that I created. So just a 3, which is basically right in the middle, and that equals a total of 14 points out of 20, so the same, right, as, yeah, it's the same as the Hella palette. Then the last palette that I have is my Love Notes palette from Beauty Bay, and it's actually the one that I'm using for this week. So this is a beautiful romantic color story. I will have again the footage rolling of this palette. It's a really nice one. It has a few different tones in the palette, which I did different looks with, but overall it's more of a pastel palette with those rosy kind of romantic undertones. Yeah, I really like this palette, and let's jump into the looks. So for day 1, I wanted to make a purple look, so I started off with the shade Lilac in the crease, and then I took the shade Glove on my outer corner and outer crease, as well as the very outer lower lash line, which is the deepest purple in the palette. I took the shade Spark on the center of the lid, as well as the shade Princess on the inner lid. Then for my inner corner and the inner crease, I kind of took it up a little bit. I used the shade Pillow, which is actually my focus shade for this palette, but I'm going to get to that in a second. Then for my lower lash line, I took the shade Lavender, which is a really pale purple. And then I used the shade Soap as the last shade, and that was just to blend everything out in my crease. So that's the first look, which is a purple look, and I really like how this one turned out. For day 2, I wanted to focus more on the pinkier kind of tones, and I started off by taking the shade Handkerchief in my crease, which is a really bright pink shade. Then I ended up taking the shade Flush, which is a slightly lighter version of that other shade, and I used that to blend the first shade out. Then I took the shade Ruby on my outer corner, which is the bottom right corner shade. Then I used the shade Cheeks to blend everything out in my outer crease. After that, I moved on to some shimmer shades, and I used the shade Confetti on my center of my lid, the shade Bellini on my inner lid, and then I took the shade Cupid, which is also shimmer shade, and used that for my liner. For my lower lash line, I used the shade Angel and used it as a kind of blending out shade. It's quite a pale shade and it didn't really work the best down there, but I did use it that way. And lastly, I used the shade Chandelier on my inner corner. I used a lot of the kind of this side of the palette for that look, but that is the second look. For the third and final look, it's actually the look that I'm wearing today. This is it. I'm gonna scooch forward a little bit so you can see what the eyeshadow looks like. But for today, I used the shade Mahogany on my outer corner and crease. Hopefully you can see here. I used the shade Corset on my crease and in like the blending area. Then I took the shade Candlestick all over my lid, which is that bronzy shade. The shade Cotton to clean everything up, mainly like out here to make this side here sharp. And then lastly, the shade Pillow on my inner corner, and that is look for day 3. So that is the third and final look. Like I said, I did also have pans in this palette. As you can see, I did actually hit the bonus pan this month, or like using this shade Bellini. I used it in the second look and I hit pan on it, which is really exciting. So bonus pan right there. But I noticed that I forgot to roll a focus shade for this palette in my last update, so I actually ended up rolling, and at the time I only had 2 pans. I had the pan in the shade Pillow as well as this one here called Spark. So I ended up putting it in my phone and I did a random number generator, which you can see right here, and I rolled 1, which is the shade Pillow right there. I haven't actually used it 5 times. I've only reached for it 4 times, including today, so today is the 4th time. So I'm 1 short. However, I am pre-filming this video a little bit. It's the 31st today, so it's a couple of days before this is going up. So I will make sure to use it 1 more time before I move on to the next palette. Probably tomorrow, so that I can hit my 5 uses on that shade. But I can definitely see that the pan has expanded, which is really exciting. But that is this palette right here. And lastly, I'm going to go through the ranking. So for the ranking and color story, I gave it a 4. I said I love these romantic tones and the different types of shades that are in here. They all go together, but you can also create some very distinct looks, which is kind of what I wanted to do with my 3 looks. I made like a purple look, a pink look, and more of a neutral look. It does, however, run a little light, which is not a bad thing for me, but it could be if you like deeper looks or if you have a deeper skin tone than me. For versatility, I gave it a 3. I said you have the option to make both neutral and colorful looks. Pink, purple, red, peachy, etc. However, they all fall into that kind of romantic kind of undertone. Also, all shades run relatively light, like I said, which means that you can't create much depth with this palette. For quality, I gave it a 4. I said the shimmers are fantastic in this palette and the mattes perform pretty nice. Some of the shades are harder to layer and you have to build them from darkest to lightest, and that's the only reason I'm docking a point, so 4 there. For personal ranking, I gave it a 4. I said I love this palette, especially as I love lighter and more romantic looks. I know this palette isn't for everyone, but I do really enjoy this one and the looks that I make from it. So if you add that up, that means that this palette ended up getting 15 out of 20 points, and that is the final palette for this month. So before I go ahead and show you the new palettes that are rolling in, I wanted to also go through the points that I've earned from my beauty bank. So I wanted to go through my eyeshadow bank and let you know how I'm doing. So let's jump straight into that. So first up, the first point where I can earn is via No Pan Left Behind. So every time I complete No Pan Left Behind for the first time with a palette, I get a point for that. So I ended up getting No Pan Left Behind on 3 palettes this month, which is the Colourpop The Child, Oden's Eye Hella, and Beauty Bay Love Notes. So the 3 out of the 4 focus palettes that I had. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it for my Product Level Up palette yet, which is not the best, but I'm gonna get there very soon. So for now, it's 3 points for that category. Then for 10 uses, I end up getting 23 points, which is really, really good. So every time I get 10 points, every time I get 10 uses, I get 1 point. And I'll always continue on that. Every time I have like 20 points, I get another point, 30 points, another point. So it kind of adds up. So every time I hit an additional 10 points, I add another point as well. So first up, we have the shade Tempera from my Soft Glam palette. I reached up for that 20 times. and I have now reached for that one 50 times in total this year. I have the shade Rosewood from Burberry. I used that 30 times for a total of 90 times this year. I have Terra Moon's Chasing Comets. I used that 10 times. Sultry from the Soft Glam palette I used 30 times this past month for a total of 60. Orange Soda from the Soft Glam palette again. This is my pan palette, which is why I have so many shades with a lot of usage in there. I reached for that one 10 times for a total of 20. I have the shade Ripe from the Metropolis palette, which is in my product level, no sorry, my Pandos eyeshadows, and that one I reached for 10 times. Evergreen from the At For Sight palette, which is the product level up palette, I reached for that 10 times. Burnt Orange from Soft Glam I reached for 10 times. Same with Cypress Umber from the same palette, I also reached for that one 10 times. I have two Cleona shades, which is the shade Yellow and Gilding, and I reached for those two 10 times each. I have a couple more shades from my Pan palette. We have the shade Sienna, which I reached for 10 times for a total of 20 times. Then I have a couple more shades from that palette, which I have reached for 10 times in total now, which is Noir, Glistening, Mulberry, and Rustic. All of those with 10 uses each. Then we have the shade Half Moon Bay from the Sydney Grace California Coast palette, and I reached for that one 10 times for a total of 20 uses. And lastly, we have the Pastel Roses Starlight, which is a single shadow, and I reached for that one 10 times. And adding all of that up is 23 points going into my bank from the 10 uses category, which is really, really good. I have actually decided to add in a specific area where I can add more points now. I didn't add this into the start, but I've got to add this in now because I'm getting close to a shade and I feel like this is going to be something that's going to be like a valid way to earn points, and that is going to be when I hit 100 users on a shadow, just because I think even though I continue getting 10 points every time I reach like the 10 threshold, getting 100 points is quite an achievement, so I feel like I should be rewarded a little bit extra for that. So I decided to give myself 5 additional points if I get to that threshold, obviously starting whenever I hit the first time, which should be this next upcoming month, but I want to just give a disclaimer for that. That will give 5 points for 100 uses. I also have a couple pans, literally a couple. I only have 2 that I hit this month. I hit pan on the Half Moon Bay shade from California Coast, which was in my Project Level Up Level 2 palette, and I also hit that pan in Bellini, which I already showed you, from the Lovelies palette. So that's 2 pans, which means 2 points there. The last thing, which is very exciting because it's the first time I'm earning any points for this section, and that is finished eyeshadow. I finished my first eyeshadow this month. If you didn't see my Pan palette update, little spoiler, but that was my last video going up, I believe. And I finished my first shade, which is the shade Sultry, and for each finished shade I get 5 points, which is 5 points in that category. So if you add all of that up, I ended up getting 33 points this past month, which is pretty good. And at the last update, I was at negative 112 points. And with those 33 points added on top of that, I'm down to minus 79, which is about 8 eyeshadows. And the reason why I'm negative is because I can't buy anything unless I have the points to buy something. However, if I do get something as a gift or PR or something like that, I will add it in my collection, but I will go negative. And I did get this one gifted to me from one of you guys, one of my subscribers, Carolyn. She sent this to me and I'm so grateful. But this one has 16 shades, which meant 160 negative points. But with 79 left to go, I'm just over halfway there to kind of equal this palette out. So I'm really happy with that, and I'm hopeful that I will be able to do that in the next 2 months or so. So the last thing to do before I wrap up this video is to introduce you to the new palettes that I'm going to work on for next month. So first up, we have this palette right here, which is the Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette. You can see the footage of it rolling right here. It's a beautiful palette, and I have 4 pans in this one already because I worked on this in my Product Level Up palette. But it's a beautiful palette that I think is going to work really nicely for spring. So that is the first palette that I'm rolling in right there. And before I forget, I'm also going to go ahead and pick my shade for Expand Those Pans. So I have 1 to 4, and I'm going to go ahead and pick the pan, which is 1. Okay, yay, that's my favorite shade in the palette. That is this shade here, Galaxia. So I'm going to use this one 5 times. So that is for Expand Those Pans. The second palette I want to work on for April is going to be this palette right here, which is the Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. This one is a perfect spring tone palette. It has a lot of different type of tones. It is neutrals mixed with some greens, some pinks, some purples, and it's just a perfect palette for this time of year. I'm really excited to play around with this one. I haven't really reached for this one in previous spring times very much, so I'm excited to be able to choose to reach for this one now. And with this palette I have a 1 pan hit, which means that this one is going to roll into my Expandos pans, and I'm going to want to use that one 5 times, and that's the shade Web. The third palette that I'm bringing in is going to be this palette right here, which is another Odensai palette. This is the Hey Reindeer palette, which was one of their Christmas releases last year, and this one looks like this. And even though it's a Christmas release, I think it's the perfect kind of Easter pastel kind of palette. It's more of a cool toned pastel palette, which is going to be interesting for me to reach for, but I'm excited to play around this palette. I haven't reached for it since I got it in December, so I'm excited to give it a go, and there's some absolute beautiful shades in here that I can't wait to play around with. So that is the next palette, and since I don't have any pans in this one, it's obviously not going to roll into Expandos pans. I'm just going to play around with it in the assigned week. And those are the 3 palettes that I'm selecting. However, I'm not sure if I'm gonna level up for my product level up palette yet, which means that I won't have a new palette for that section of the video. So I decided to roll in a backup palette in case I don't hit my goal before the next product level up update. And if I don't, I'm gonna work on the Elva palette from Odensai. I think again it's a beautiful, perfect spring tone palette. It has a lot of kind of mauvier tones and a lot of beautiful shimmer shades, both neutral and like kind of like purpley shimmer shades, as well as a couple pop of yellows. And I think this is a beautiful, again, slightly more cool toned, mauvier spring tone palette, and I'm excited to play around with this one and reach for it. And in case it does roll into my project for this month, if I use it for one of the weeks, I'm also going to have 1 shade in my Expandos pans, which is going to be this one here, because I only have 1 pan in the palette, but that's going to be that one right there, which is the shade Jasmine. So if I don't level up, which you're going to be able to see in my pro level up update, which goes up around the 8th, I think, of January. So, you know, it's like just over a week from after filming this, so I don't even know myself if I'm going to level up yet. But if I don't, I'm going to work on this palette, and I'm also going to get an extra shade for my Expandos pans, and if not, that's fine. But that is going to be it for today, you guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Let me know if you're doing something similar with your collection this year. I don't think a lot of people is gonna like jump on this bandwagon like they did with Product Level Up, because this is quite a personalized project for me. But if you're doing something similar, please let me know. And otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you guys are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys!